Welcome to Square Notes, the Sacred Music Podcast. Your chance to learn about the teachings of the Catholic Church on sacred music, both in theory and practice. Through interviews, discussions, and music, your hearts and minds will be lifted up and better understand what it means to sing the praise of His glory. And now, your host, Dr. Jennifer Donelson-Nowicka.
Hello, listeners, and welcome to Square Notes, the Sacred Music Podcast. We're bringing you a really special interview for episode 4 of season 5. It was truly an honor to spend some time talking to Naji Hakim, an amazing improviser and composer, a student of Jean Langlais and successor to Olivier Messiaen at La Trinité in Paris. He shares with us a bit about his life and the sounds which most impacted his imagination as a child in Beirut, his studies with Langlais, his interactions with Messiaen, and most importantly, some questions about his improvisations. Here's the interview. Mr. Hakim, thank you so much. I'm really honored and delighted you're able to be here with me today.
It's my pleasure. Thank you very much for inviting me to have this session.
Could you share with listeners a little bit about your earliest years? And I'm thinking here of your time in Beirut and a bit about your musical studies or what maybe fascinated you or helped you along as a young student.
My first musical memory is when I went to the barber. I don't remember what age I had, maybe 3 or 4 years old. I went with my mother, and after the barber did his work, I was very surprised that he took a lute and he started playing for us lutes. So it was like a private concert. It was so fascinating for me. It was like a dream. I couldn't believe it. And this was my first musical memory, hearing the lute.
Wow, that's so wonderful.
Yeah.
An unexpected place.
Unexpected place, yes.
And when did you start studying the keyboard?
In my mother's family, they had piano.
Mm-hmm.
They had a piano, and we visited our aunt and grandmother, and my mother played the piano by ear, and some of my uncles as well. They all played by ear, my grandmother also. And I was very fascinated by the piano, and I remember walking a day in the streets of Beirut with my mother, and I saw a piano in a shop. I told my mother, why don't you buy a piano? And a few months later, my father offered a piano to my mother, and I remember the first time she sat and played the piano, and we were all around her, me and my brothers and sister. And it was a great feast for us to have this piano. And little by little, I sat next to my mother, and little by little, I pushed her and I took her place. We all had piano lessons, but I continued.
Yes. And when did you first play the organ?
And the organ, I remember first time I entered the chapel of Collège du Sacré-Cœur in Beirut, a Christian brothers school, where there were a big chapel with a beautiful French romantic organ, de Bière-Gloton, in the line of Cavaillé-Coll, 2-manual organ, romantic, French romantic. And I remember the first time I entered the chapel, I still remember the door from which I entered, and I heard the organ. I didn't know what it was. I was very much impressed by the sound and waited until the end of the Mass to look back and see in the tribune the instrument, which was my first love at first hear.
Yeah. Wow.
And little by little, we went to the choir, and I was standing near the organist, and I was able to touch the organ maybe at 12, 13 years old, and gave a first recital at 15 years old.
Wow.
In this chapel.
Wow. Was it that you had a separate organ teacher that was different from your piano teacher, or what were you studying with that
No,
teacher?
I had I had a piano teacher, but no, I didn't have any organ teacher. There was no organ teachers. So I studied alone, used the method of Dupré, the method of Gleason, the method of Lemans.
Yeah.
And I was autodidact
Yeah.
in the beginning until I met Jean Langlais in Paris.
Right. That's amazing. Do you remember what was on your first recital?
Yes, some played the toccata and fugue in D minor. I played Bohemond toccata. I played Étoile du Soir by Vierne. I think I played a movement by a sonata by Hindemith, a Prélude, Fugue et Variation by Franck.
Wow, that's wonderful.
Yeah.
So, what other sorts of musical sounds surrounded you? Like, as you were a teenager and really beginning to study the organ? I'm thinking here of like folk elements surrounding you that had a deep impact on your musical imagination when you were young.
To make you laugh a little, in the morning, especially in summertime, the living is easy, but where it is very hot, very warm in Lebanon, we slept and the windows were opened. In the morning, we had to close the windows for not hearing the music, the folk music out loud in the loudspeakers, and in the taxis, we could hear all the time Kulthum and folk music, Lebanese folk music, Egyptian folk music. I grew up with this context, and I wanted to ignore it completely because I loved the music of Bach, Mendelssohn, Haydn, Beethoven, Poulenc, Wagner, Tchaikovsky. I was like attracted like a magnet, by this Occidental music, and wanted to ignore completely the Oriental music. But it was in my heart, and it came back to me when I was maybe 40 years old.
So it's like it was lying dormant there.
Yes, it was in my heart, in my body.
Wow. So let's come back to that in a moment. But let's talk a little bit now about you were leaving Lebanon for Paris in the 1970s, and you went into engineering. But soon thereafter, you started studying with Langlais. Can you tell us what your first months of study with him were focused on, and how did he begin with you as a teacher?
I remember the first lesson with Jean Langlais. I played to him Toccata in F by Bach. He was very clear, very pedagogue, excellent teacher. Maybe my best teacher, as knowing how to get what he wants me to do. At the end of the first lesson, he told me, I have been teaching for 42 years. I never had a pupil like you. You will make a big career. He spoke like a prophet, so he gained my full confidence, and he became like a second father to me.
Yeah.
And I was completely dedicated to him as a teacher and wanting to play his music and follow his advice. During 10 years it lasted.
Yeah. Can you describe a little bit about what it was like studying improvisation with him?
I harmonized for him something the first time I improvised for him, and then I did a plagal cadence, then a perfect cadence. He said, "Stop." Okay, I understood. No. So he told me, "Look, we have to start with good basis. I will learn you how to read Gregorian chant."
Wow.
So he was blind, and he taught me how to read Gregorian chant.
That's amazing. So yeah. was it out of the Liber that you were just playing out of the Liber? Wow.
Yes. So I was 20 years old. I didn't know anything about it, and he taught me how to read it and discover it, as a treasure. And he taught me how to love it.
Yeah.
And one day he told me, these are composers who have done these. It's not my concierge. I learned to read Gregorian, and reading Gregorian was the best way to learn how to harmonize it,
Yeah.
because the harmony has to draw its substance from the melody. So I learned the modes and to harmonize the melodies using the colors of the mode.
Yeah. Wonderful.
Dorian, Phrygian,
Yeah.
Lydian, Mixolydian, and he liked very much the Phrygian mode.
Yes.
Yes, he had a special crush over the Phrygian mode.
Yeah.
Yeah.
When you experience modes, do you think of them conceptually as colors? Of course, we'll talk about Messiaen a little bit, but if you're staying in a mode or switching to a mode, do you conceptualize it as different colors?
Not in the way of Messiaen, because Messiaen, he really saw colors associated with
Yes.
harmonies, but this is something very special to him. No, I don't see colors. No, I hear sounds.
Yeah. What's your general approach, maybe that you learned from Langlais, or the approach that you've taken to the rhythm of the chant? Is it, of course, if we look at Tournemir's music, he had a very kind of equalized approach to each note, and he would hold out long, repeated notes, those sorts of things. But how do you conceptualize that rhythm?
Interesting question. About Tournemir, what was very important is the rubato.
Mm-hmm.
Langlais insisted very much on the rubato in playing Tournemir's music, and saying that when Tournemir played his own music, you could hardly follow him because he exaggerated so much the rubato
Mm-hmm.
that you could hardly follow him.
Mm-hmm.
My approach, my rhythmical approach to Gregorian chant, I'm fascinated by the complexity of the rhythm in the Gregorian chant. Because if you have to write it in modern notation, you have not less complexity than in Stravinsky, 1 2 1 2 3 1 2 3 4.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's the rhythm of the speech. This is particularly interesting for me in Gregorian chant, besides the modal colors.
Yeah. Maybe we can come back to that when we're talking about your own improvisations in a moment, because I'm really fascinated about what you're saying about the complexity of the rhythm, but also about how it interacts with your sense of mixture with Middle Eastern and Lebanese rhythms. Maybe let's come back to that in a moment, but maybe follow our chronological arc here. Langlais, his writings and compositions in his later years evidenced his struggles after Vatican II with the changing of musical standards and expectations in the church. Did he mention any of those struggles with you?
He was furious about Vatican II. He was completely furious. That's why he wrote, I don't remember the number of his organ concerto, a concerto called Reaction. This was reaction against the decadence in the music, in the liturgy.
Right.
And it was the same for Messiaen. Messiaen hated it, and that's why he came to Basilique du Sacré-Cœur to attend Mass instead of going to La Trinité. And that's how I met Messiaen.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So what was your own experience of that changing landscape, changing musical landscape? The expectations about the place of high art in the liturgy, the place of the organ in the liturgy, as you began your work when you were appointed titular at the Basilica of Sacré-Cœur?
Well, at Sacré-Cœur, it was a very good liturgy. They sang some Gregorian chant, and they sang also beautiful French melodies from the tradition. So it was I had the privilege to be organist at Basilique du Sacré-Cœur at that time, because it changed now. the music was rather good, even if it was there was a change in the liturgy, the priest facing the people and using the French to the liturgy in general. But the quality of the repertoire was good, very good,
Yeah.
comparatively to other churches in France.
Yes. So let's dive into your improvisations a little bit more now. So you're working at Sacré-Cœur and still studying with Langlais while you are working, or you moved away from studies?
No, when I became organist at Sacré-Cœur, I went back to Langlais to take a lesson with him. He told me, "What do you want to teach me? Mathematics?" He told me, "No, now it's finished.
Yeah.
You are my friend." He did not want anymore to give me lessons.
That's
It
beautiful.
was very nice. And even, he asked me to collaborate with him to compose 15 pieces together with and he would compose 15 other pieces. These were our expressions.
Yeah.
We wrote 30 pieces together, 15 he and 15
Yeah, that's
myself.
beautiful. That's beautiful.
Yeah.
So you're improvising at the Mass, and I'd like to talk a little bit about your kind of mental process in preparing an improvisation. For example, what is determinant of your choice of themes, and especially how those themes might relate to the Mass of the day? Do you have like a sense of the melodies that you choose as a sort of commentary or reflection on the liturgy?
I follow the liturgy in real time. So I listen to the readings and I answer on the spot. And the same for the singing. There was at Sacré-Cœur a maîtrise, and there was also a scola of 3 singers. So I listened to their singing and I answered them. This is, for me, the best format for making improvisation. It was really improvised in real time. And, arriving at the Basilique du Sacré-Cœur, it was so much work to do. I had so many songs to prepare to have on 2-3 stands that I didn't have time to think of anything else than doing a right accompaniment and follow the text of the liturgy
Yeah, yeah,
and the sermons.
yeah. Were a lot of the tunes then that you ended up choosing, were they the Gregorian chants, or did you start bringing in other tunes that you thought related to those tunes that you were responding to?
Actually, the tunes became, I think, since my childhood until today, when I speak to you, when I listen to a melody that I love, I incorporate it in my body. So it is part of my memory. So I don't need to take a score to see which melody I will use to improvise on. I use very much my memory when I improvise.
Right.
And I adapt on what is sung or what is said.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
and I can say that what is very important is not only the melodies but also the texts, because until now, when I write to friends or my children, I have quotations, biblical quotations, and all these come from my stay at the Basilique du Sacré-Cœur and also from my childhood going to church and listening to the readings.
Yeah. That's wonderful. Do you feel like the role of the organ is a sort of like commentator on what just happened, or in the style of the Roman liturgy itself, the collect, that it kind of brings together
Correct.
the themes?
Of course, the organ is it prolongs the prayer. prolongs the prayer, and it's part of it.
Yeah.
It's for me, it is my offering.
Let's move now to your time at Trinité. Of course, Messiaen died in 1992, and in 1993, you succeeded him as titular at Trinité. Could you talk a little bit about the feelings you had stepping into that role at the parish where he'd been for over 60 years?
Well, it was very easy for me to sit on the bench after him for one reason, because he came at Sacré-Cœur and he asked to meet me. So I came down from the tribune and I went to meet him. I met his wife, then I met him. And when he saw me, it was a few months before he passed away. When he saw me, he stood up. I told him, Maître, please remain seated. No, he wanted to stand up. He looked at me with a deep look and said, I love all what you do. I never heard somebody improvising like you. I told him, how, Maître, you say this? He said, yes. So I invited him to come to my organ. He told me, look, it's impossible for me to climb the stairs. And we had a very kind conversation, well, in presence of his wife and two priests, one priest of Sacré-Cœur and one priest from La Trinité, who coincidentally was there. That's how I succeeded to him.
Yeah.
Because his wife was testimony. And so when I arrived there, for me, it was not evident because of the organ milieu, but for me, it was natural after the testimony he has done to me. And to thank him and to thank his wife, I composed my Tombeau d'Olivier Messiaen, where it was a real homage to him and his music and to his wife and their kindness.
What is it that you feel like you are most inspired by in Messiaen's music?
You know, as Langlais said, everybody was influenced by Messiaen. Langlais speaks of himself also. He was influenced by Messiaen. Well, I had a period where I was influenced by him. But I think that it is part of my chronology, but I'm not limited to this source of inspiration. I read much of his own writings on music, on his technique de mon langage musical, but also his posthum work, Traité de rythme, d'ornithologie et de couleur. Not all of it, but several passages, including the first book, and very touched by his approach of rhythm, of time, yes, and the modes, etc.
Right. So let's move now to talking a little bit more about your improvisation. And we kind of had that dormant period where these sounds that you grew up with in Beirut lay unused. I'm assuming that they came back through your improvisation, or did they come back to you through your composition?
Well, the two, in improvisation and composition. Well, if I want to speak very technically, it is the rhythm and the modality. The rhythm, especially the irregular bars, you know, as in Bulgarian rhythms, these rhythms that we call aksak, 1 2 1 2 3 1 2 1 2 3, mm-hmm, or 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 1 2, and the modality with scales with double augmented seconds. Mm-hmm. No, 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 for example, yes. But not only, what could be perceived by Occidental ear as a distortion of the scales. This is very interesting to me. So I don't really calculate them. It comes naturally. Mm-hmm. That's very interesting. Mm-hmm. I don't say I will use this mode or this mode. Actually, I cannot I don't even know the names of the modes, the Oriental modes. Yes, I don't care. I'm not doing musicology. I'm doing music. So, and just enjoying the scales with their originality of the tetrachords and different colors of each mode. I worked hard on the Hindu modes, the Carnatic modes of the South India during 1 year. Very technically, I worked on them to find new harmonic progressions. This was very interesting for me before I wrote my Missa Redemptionis for choir a cappella, and in which I used only the Hindu modes. It is very difficult to sing, not because of vocal difficulty, because of the harmony. The singers should have very good harmonic ear.
Yeah.
To feel the attractions, the needs of resolution.
Yeah. This is so wonderful what you're saying. Just because, the use of these other modes, even juxtaposed or mixed with the Gregorian modes, is something that interested Tournamire, Messiaen. I mean, of course, so many within your lineage. But you had a repertoire that was native to you and in your ear, which is quite different from this experience that you're sharing with them of the study of the Carnatic modes. What's your way in which you mix that with the Western modes and Western tunes? Do you find that there are occasions to juxtapose them or translate one into the other? What inspires you about the mixture between the two?
Well, I think this is something mysterious. I don't know if there is something that I do consciously. I think it is a gift. It's the grace. It's too difficult. If I analyze too much, I cannot get to what I am doing. If I analyze too much. I think that Einstein was very right when he said to invent is to think at the side. Yeah, if you analyze too much, maybe you get to do something, but maybe it is dry. Well, for me.
Yeah.
I remember when I used the Carnatic modes for my Missa Redemptionis. Well, I did this, but when I had I don't know, several hundreds of progressions I prepared, but many of them I threw them away because I did not like them. So I chose only what I liked, what I sounded good to me. Then I transposed the Carnatic modes to find new complex things, etc. And I started writing my symphony, my orchestral symphony, Les Noces de l'Agneau. I found in the middle of my work, I abandoned this and let my instinct help me. I think the subconscious has a very, very important role.
Yeah.
The conscious is not everything. Of course, you control for not doing inconsistent things, but the inspiration needs subconscious.
Right. Can we talk a little bit about your use of Maronite melodies? Where have you found interesting to use them, maybe in compositions? And what about in improvisation? And what's the Roman Rite?
I'm not sure I've used them much in the Roman Rite, but I have done a CD of Maronite improvisation on Maronite songs. And I almost canceled the project because the people who wanted me to do it, they made me wait 2-3 hours and they did not come. Oh. So I almost got back home and they arrived at the last minute. I was very angry about them. But then why, how do you make me wait with my mother in the cold outside all this time? We start immediately. So we went to the organ. It was at Trinité, and the singing was already done. So I listened on the earphone, just the beginning of the melody. Well, one stanza, and then stop. I improvised, and then I did it, all of it, all the CD. Then I did some compositions where I used Gregorian Maronite song, and very strangely, in the Tombeau d'Olivier Messiaen, the second movement, I used the Maronite song. It's actually a Maronite song which I learned later on that was from Egyptian origin.
Interesting.
Yeah, and I used it again for a string quartet. I did variations on this Marian Maronite melody in a string quartet.
Yeah.
Then on a friend of mine, priest, wanted me to write a setting of two very old Maronite songs for tenor and string quartet. So I did this. I was very happy, and I was so happy that I did a version only for string quartet.
Could you talk a little bit about the role of improvisation in your compositional process?
Well, I will make this distinction between improvisation and composition. When you improvise, an improvisation that lasts 5 minutes, lasts 5 minutes. A composition that lasts 5 minutes, you could spend maybe 6 months working on it. So if you use improvisation to compose, it is part of the work, but it is only a very small part of the work. Because when you compose, you go backwards, forward, you start again and again.
Do you find that there are certain ideas that come to you that you feel like, this is something that is for a composition rather than an improvisation?
I remember once I was in the improvisation class of Rolande Falcinelli in the Conservatoire. I improvised to her. Her comment: "You are a composer." That was her comment. Yes, because I don't use formulas that I apply to each theme to do the same thing. Each theme inspires new ideas. The melody is a point de départ, and you have to consider it, build on its elements, work on it. That's why that's a common point for me between improvisation and composition. There are certain similarities. So I may be saying something and the contrary little time before, but a good improvisation should sound like a composition, and a composition should sound also as natural as an improvisation.
Yes.
But it's not the same. It's not the same work.
In closing, so many of our listeners are working church musicians. They're not out giving concerts, and they have that experience of sitting down to improvise. And for them, it is a very spiritual experience. Like you said, the offering that you give as an organist, where you put everything that you are and all the gifts that you have back into sound in that offering. You talked about how, the recording of the Maronite melodies, you responded instantly to the singing. In the liturgy, you respond instantly to the sound that you heard. But those are two very different venues, the recording and the liturgy. What do you find is your spiritual approach that you bring in that moment of offering in the liturgy? Does that offering change the sound? Messiaen talked about that, for example. When I improvise in front of the Blessed Sacrament, it's different.
Yeah, I understand your question. It is very important and it inspires respect. However, there is a important technical questions that should have precedence and allow you to approach the adoration, the liturgical service with humility. The technical question is the harmony. The technique of harmony is a condition sine qua non to make improvisation. Unless you want to make what you want, rubbish and whatever you want. But harmony is very important, to know how to harmonize in 4-part harmony without consecutive octaves and consecutive fifths, parallel octaves, parallel fifths, except if you want to do it like this, But this is very important. This is very hard. It takes time, but it is so important to deserve to make an offering to the Blessed Sacrament in the rule of art. Harmony is important. Mm-hmm. I spent long time working on harmonization of Gregorian chant, of chorale. And until now, when I compose, when I orchestrate, if the harmony is not good, then whatever you do will not be good. Mm-hmm. And in an orchestra, if the brass play wrong notes, it's a catastrophe. If strings play wrong notes, it's less important. But when the harmony play wrong, this is a catastrophe. Mm-hmm. Because the brass are the lungs of the body, of the orchestral body.
Mm-hmm. What you say is beautiful because it has a sort of shape, a spiritual shape for the entire training of the musician. The musician who is a Catholic, who is working week after week on the organ bench at Mass, that all of what you're doing throughout the week maybe comes together and reaches a sort of pinnacle in that moment, but it's all prepared through the preparation that you do for everything in your technique.
Yeah, the technique is very important. Technique for a pianist, technique for the harmony. Harmony is very, very important. In all my studies, the most difficult part was harmony, but it was the most important. Mm-hmm. It was because when the harmony is good, you can take out of it lines and draw the counterpoints. Mm-hmm. And when the harmony is good, you can orchestrate well and take lines out of the harmony. All comes from the harmony. Good harmony, good counterpoint. Mm-hmm. Good harmony, good orchestration. Mm-hmm. And Rimsky-Korsakov says this in his orchestration book. He says, finally, if the harmony is good, whatever you do, the orchestra will sound good. So in other words, he was saying, my book is useless because if you have good harmony, your orchestra will sound good.
That's a great thought. Well, yeah. Thank you so much. I really am just so impressed by your work and also the spirit with which you undertake the work. It's just a real treasure for the church and for those musicians who desire to give that same offering.
Thank you very much.
We hope you've enjoyed listening to Square Notes, the Sacred Music Podcast with Dr. Jennifer Donelson-Nowicka. For more information about this episode, sacred music resources, or upcoming events, visit our website at sacredmusicpodcast.com. You can subscribe to our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, YouTube, or your favorite podcast app. If you enjoy our podcast, please write us a review on iTunes. This improves our iTunes ranking and helps others find out about the podcast. The music you heard at the beginning of this episode is Hec Dies by William Byrd, sung by the London Oratory Schola Cantorum Boys Choir, directed by Charles Cole from the CD Sacred Treasures of England. The music at the conclusion of this podcast is from the Prelude and Fugue in G Major, BWV 550 by Johann Sebastian Bach, performed by Jennifer Donelson-Nowicka. We look forward to having you join us next time, and until then, may we sing the praise of His glory.